Hello everybody, Plain and Simple here. Welcome back to the channel. Now today's going to be just a little bit different. I've been asked over the past couple of artistic videos I released about the color time lapses, kind of how I choose the colors that I go with, as well as how I go about making it from a blank page with an outline to a finished colored piece and how I get to that final area. So today's going to be an explanation of that, as well as some of the basic methods that I use, some explanations on my techniques and my style. And the first thing I do want to say is that there are so many different methods out there. Definitely feel free to look around the internet. You're going to have a lot of experience on tutorials from other artists out there as well. Today is just about my style, how I get from that blank page to the finished area. So one thing I did want to mention as well is that everybody is going to have their own unique styles and techniques that they develop over time as an artist, and the more they practice and just do work. So I always suggest, if you feel like being creative, go for it. Anytime that you want to, you're going to develop over time, make your own style that's personal for you, and it's going to feel much more rewarding at the end of the day. But the first thing that you want to kind of keep in mind, especially myself, is shapes of the objects that you're coloring, as well as the light source and where that's coming from. So if you think of this as just a basic circle, that's fine. You can color this in, call it a day, and be done. But if you want to get that nice sort of 3D aspect with the nice shading and some like drop shadow coming off of the sphere, which we'll call it, then you do need to think about the light. So if it's coming down from here, let's say, we got ourselves a little arrow. So the light's coming this way. You always want to have your lightest portion on that side of the object, as well as the darkest portion on the other side. So you got to think shadow opposite of the light, lightest portion as the light comes down. Now this may seem obvious to a lot of people. However, the first method that you want to make sure of is you want to bring it from the darkest that you can do, depending on how dark you want to make your piece, up to the lightest. So just as a black and white example, so this is just a very rough example here, but you can see kind of what I mean. When the light comes in, you want to have that lightest spot here and the darkest spot on the other side, and consider the shape of the figure. So with a sphere, you know it's going to be curved. So you always want to make sure that your lines are following this. So the light's coming from here, following the curve of the shape from where the light's coming in. The darkness is following this curve, following the curves for everything. And as you get to the top, you get that more of a rounded area, so it gets darkest towards the top and the bottom for the light difference. Now you can also consider this for other shapes, such as cylinders, let's say. So if you have this, the light's coming from here, you always want to make sure, thinking of it as a 3D shape. Now again, this is just a very rough idea here. But you want to have that bottom area nice and dark, and this can always be achieved just with the pressure of your pencil. So nice and dark on the bottom, and as you come up, slowly lightening until where that light hits. That makes sure that it gives you much more of that 3D effect. Now also thinking of this side not really being hit by the light, it's almost in complete darkness. This side, however, would be a little bit lighter. But you can tell what I mean here, and you can break almost anything down into some of these basic shapes. Of course, then you also have things such as cubes, which if you think of the light coming again from this angle, this is where it's directly hitting. There's not going to be much light there. It is coming from the front, but this is more on an off side, so there's going to be at least a little bit of shadow here. There's not quite as much blending when it comes to cubes. This side on the side with no light, so of course that is going to be darker. Now, always consider these shapes and find them in the pieces that you're working with. It's going to make things much easier for your overall shading to come back later and put in a lot of detail. Now this can also be attributed to colored pencils. A couple of different options for you there as well. You do have the pressure, as mentioned before, so let's go ahead and choose a pretty normal, a green color. So with pressure, what I mean is you can have a nice and light color by pressing very lightly, and then you can move it down with the harder you press to bring out that darker color. So that is one method, and I'm going to show you a little bit about how that can be achieved here as well. So you can see that does change it almost similar to the black and white with just a graphite pencil. It works the same way with the colors. So you can just press more pressure on the bottom here and just very light pressure on the top, and you can create your shadows that way, thinking about the light source for your drawing or your color. Now you can also do this in the same style, but with the hues of the color itself. So if you're starting and you pick out this green, this is getting closer to my style of work that I like to use for colored pencils. And then you can find yourself a slightly darker green. So you have this here, and you just want to find yourself 3 or 4 colors that are right around that area of the green. This will add some nice hues to the color itself. Of course, you want to go through and just pick out, that's a little bit more blue, so I'm going to take that one out for now. So here are the 3 main ones that I'm going to use. Let's get ourselves another circle here, and I'll go ahead and demonstrate that. So you have your basic shapes, you have your basic one color technique as well. Let me move this up slightly. I'm going to put another circle right here. And then you have the hue technique. And the one thing I like to do with this is you can kind of follow the shapes. If you notice, the whole time I've been coloring, I've been kind of following the shapes with the direction that I'm coloring for. So light is coming down this way, circle here. We can definitely bring in the lighter colors, and let me show you how this works. All right, and now once you get the image kind of divided up into the color differences that you want, the one thing that we do want to do from here is blend them together, as now you see that they're kind of 3 separate distinct colors. But the more we work these in, the closer we can get them and make it look like a nice transition. So as you can see, it starts to blend the colors together. It gives you a little bit more of kind of the hues of one color. Instead of just having a singular color, a little bit lighter going to darker, you get a nice kind of very light green to a mid green and then to a darker green onto the bottom. Now, this is getting a little bit closer to my style, which we're going to get into here in just a moment. And the one thing that I always like to do to make sure I can add some of the deepest and darkest shadows into my colorings is actually using a black colored pencil. So for any of these, you can use this as an extra layer to kind of add in, almost similar to this, but we're just going to add it in as the darkest parts of the image. Now it's not going to work. I put a lot of layers onto this one, so it may have a little bit harder of time, but you can see what I mean. By kind of adding that little bit of black, it gives just that little bit more depth to the image itself, because most of the time the shadows that we do see are perceived as more black in nature, especially when they get to their darkest forms. So just adding a little bit of that gives it more of that spherical feel instead of just being a flat circle. And one other thing you can think about too is where the shadows from this are going to drop. So these would probably be dropping out somewhere this way, just as a circle. It gives them something to sit on, gives it much more of the 3D feel. But moving on to my style, the last one that we're going to look into here today, and then I'll show you some examples from my colorings that I've done over time. So if we get just one more circle here, and I'm going to be using the same greens that we've been doing this whole time. So I like to sometimes take another color outside of the spectrum. Now yellow is kind of my default to go to for sort of lighter sections. It just adds a little bit more color instead of being a straight white. So what I like to do is similar to this, along with the black on the bottom, but I like to layer my colors. So starting with a yellow for kind of the shine, and I like to put that as a layer down on the entire thing. Now it might be very faint on the camera here, but trust me, I'm putting it down. And then I want to start with the lightest color. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to leave the section open where that light is hitting. Again, coming down from that same angle as all of these, or a little bit from the front and straight down towards it. So taking this around, let me show you how this layering style of mine works. And when I get to this point, as you can see, I was kind of layering the colors over top of each other. It makes it a lot smoother, a little bit easier to kind of make it flow together just a little bit more than some of the other techniques that I've used in the past. Now at the end of this, I do always like to take that last color, depending on what it is. This yellow might be a little bit too strong, but just to kind of layer over the entire thing, and it just helps to bring it all together slightly. As you're bringing the colors over each other one at a time, more and more, you keep working it, which is why a lot of people may be able to color a page in 30 minutes. It takes me a little bit more towards 3 to 4 hours possibly for larger work. So speaking about my technique here, I've shown you guys a little bit on some of the other techniques that we've been able to do. So I'm just going to label this as mine. And of course, I always do use the black at the end, which I did completely forget to mention there. So just throwing in that little bit more of a kind of black feel. And of course, we're going to throw in our little cast shadow here from the light source coming down and through and casting that shadow of the object itself. So you can apply everything that I've talked about today to the drawings that I've already done. So let's go ahead and take a look here at the eyes. Now these are extremely similar to what we've been talking about. As you can see, these are just very big circles, which means once you get into the coloring phase, you're just going to have to worry about shading down here going up. I still have the lighting coming this way for these. So shading for the general overall is what I'm talking about, shading down here. And then of course you have the cast shadow from this, which you'll see right here on this one. And then also cast shadows from other things. Now once you get to these portions, you can think of this almost like a cylinder. So then the shadows would be on this side and then slowly lighten on the top. Now it might get a little bit more intricate into these pieces and blobs, but you can always take them. For instance, this one. You have this kind of crazy design here. But if you just take a moment to look at that as a whole, you can split that up into a nice circle here, circle here. You can treat almost this entire thing as a slight, oops, wrong way, as a slight cylinder. So you want your main shadow here. Now this one's a lot flatter. You want your main shadows on this side. Same thing over here. It's all a matter of just splitting the shapes up into very simple and easy to use. So the reason how I choose colors, and then we're going to take a look at the underwater scene as well, I kind of just choose them as to what I feel is right. There is no wrong, there is no right colors. You can color anything how you like. Of course, I use the orange here as kind of a shimmering from the orange outside layers to add a little bit more depth. My eyes personally are a mix of green and blue. Sometimes they change over, it's a little weird, but that's the reason why I chose those colors for the irises. And I wanted to make them a little bit more in depth, so I used some darker colors towards the center along with some lighter colors towards the outside, creating just a little bit of texture. Now moving on to the underwater scene here that I've done in the past. Again, with this one, let me grab another piece of tracing paper. You can split everything up into its basic shapes. Of course, you have the easy one, such as here, with your box of the treasure chest, and then you have all of this in the center. Now, I chose this as a secondary light source, so it's going to shine a little bit of light over here and around and just slightly around the outside edges. But if the light, as you can see here, is coming from this angle, from up here, then you want to have it, this side is going to be some of the darkest, as well as this side, because both of these aren't seeing the light. I'm counting this as coming from the back, so it's going to be more like that. Now, same thing with the octopus. He may be a little bit more complicated, but the easiest way to think about it, if you look at this head, it's just one giant circle. Same thing with his tentacles. You can treat these as cylinders. Same thing, as soon as the light comes down, the highlights are right up here and your shadows are right on the bottom, and you can treat it that same way around a curve, just connecting these pieces. And that's how I get all of the depth, the shadow, and the shading within all of my drawings. Same thing for this. You can think of it almost as a very light giant cylinder because it curves on both ends and it meets in the middle. So you're going to have shadows more towards the bottom since the light's coming from this side, more shadow over here on the opposite side of the ship. Now, as far as choosing colors goes, underwater, so I went with blue. I mixed in a little bit of purples just to kind of match the octopus itself. And the octopus was one of the more fun parts of this coloring in the fact that I choose a specific color to go with, so purple, and then I pick some of the lighter colors, some of the darker colors. I might mix in some kind of nice dark blues to bring it all together, and then of course around these areas just throwing in some black to add that nice deep dark shadow. Now also to add a little bit of change to it, I started these spots with pink, and I made them just a little bit lighter, threw in a little bit more blues, pinks, and stayed more away from that darker purple aspect that we did for the rest of the drawing, or coloring, let me say that. Also with the ship, I started with brown, and then it's underwater, so I wanted to show a little bit of moss, so I just threw in a little bit of greens here and there, but I started very light brown, threw in a little bit of yellow here and there, and then worked my way down to use black and slowly layering colors over time. Same thing with all of the other colors you see in my images here. So as far as going all over that, the main things that I do want everyone to take away from this is definitely keep in mind all of your shapes, the shape of the shapes, and also the light source and how it affects. So spheres, cylinders, boxes, you can always break things down into those. It may not seem obvious at first, but the more you work with it, the easier it will be. And also, to layer your colors, put a little bit of a difference here and there. Even if you think of something very basic, such as you have a larger circle with a smaller circle on the inside, and maybe even a smaller one on the inside of that. Now you can make this look a couple of different ways. If your light source is coming in, you can make this flat, just color 1 color, 2 color, 3 color, or you can treat it as if the two pieces have fallen down into the larger one. So you can add some shadows around the edges here. But anyway, this is just a very basic kind of description on my style, my techniques. I wanted this video to at least give you guys a little bit of an educational boost. If you got something out of it, then I'm happy that you did. Definitely leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think. I am plain and simple. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I am out.